Hello, my beautiful souls, and welcome. This is the second attempt on a collective message that I wanted to bring through. I tried to record it yesterday, but then the whole reading kind of got hijacked. And it turned into a very specific message for probably an undercurrent stream of energy, like a very small group of people, maybe even just like one person or several persons. It's hard to tell, but it was very, very, very specific. And sometimes that happens, and it always happens for a reason. So I went with it and decided to try again with the collective message the next day. We are currently working through a very multi-layered energy. It's a breaking free of systems, of deeply, deeply rooted energies that have been there for thousands of years, really. Deeply rooted belief systems and energies. And this is no small feat to work through those kind of energies. You can call it ancestral work, but it honestly, it feels even bigger than that. I mean, it actually is ancestral work, but it's on such a collective level that it actually goes beyond our families or our family system. This is more about general cultural influences that we in our families, in our familial ancestors are, of course, part of, but it, like the energy we are working through right now, it's more of our, like the ancestors of all humankind. So, like I said, it's very multi-layered. It's a very complex energy. And I have a little bit of a hard time to, for one, make it less complex and to really cut to the chase and work through all those layers to get to the heart of things. And this is why the readings I'm doing, they are kind of, I feel like we are circling around the core of something and we are approaching it from many different angles, which is not unusual when you do those readings and channelings for a greater collective, because there's always a core energy, and the core energy has different ways of showing up in our reality, and it will play out differently for different people. So this is why at the core there's maybe always the same energy, but I will have to come from many different angles and make several readings that kind of deal with the same thing, but then again, it doesn't, because, like I said, it shows up differently in the lives of people and how we experience this energy in our own lives. One thing that's very present, and I think this is something that's that all have in common, is a struggle to express myself freely. I'm really having a hard time to speak freely. All the readings I did over the last few days, they felt like a struggle, and as if I was trying to walk upstream against a very, very strong current. And I can tell that this energy, it's affecting my lower heart space and like where my solar plexus and the heart space where they connect and meet. And this is really affecting this energy. It's something that's rooted in the heart space, and there's a great deal of pain there. And it really is affecting our ability to self-actualize in this world and in our lives. So this message is for people who have done a great ton of healing already. Like the collective I'm speaking here, you are not a newbie when it comes to your healing journey, spiritual work, all of that. You have done the work, and there is a certain mismatch that simply doesn't make sense to you, because there's this. Okay, so there's something where I can tell that you have a hard time to make meaning of it and to really comprehend it. And there is this spiritual truth, and you don't doubt that truth. You know it to be true, but at the same time, you are having a hard time understanding why it doesn't seem to be true for you. And this is the concept of as within, so without. And that the world that we are living in, that it's a direct reflection, that it's a mirror of ourselves. And like I said, you're somebody, you have done the work. You are not the kind of person who stays in a victim mentality, for example, and who is not willing to do the work to heal out of their wounds. And you are working hard. You are a hardworking person, I can tell, and you really want to better yourself. But somehow the outer world just doesn't match the amount of inner work you're doing. And you're wondering, because like I said, you don't doubt that it's a truth that the outer world is a mirror and that we are the creators of our own reality. You have arrived at that knowledge. You know it to be true. But at the same time, you don't understand why it doesn't show in your own life. And what Spirit wants to bring through here, and I had several downloads over the last few days around this topic. Spirit is saying that when this happens, that you know you're doing the work and the outer world just doesn't seem to match your inner state of mind, existence, how you feel, that there's no mismatch happening, but it's actually like always, a perfect reflection of what is happening inside. You're just not able to see it. And I want to stress that this is not about something you're doing wrong or something you are, like that it's somehow your fault that you don't see what's going on, or it's not even that you are, like, I feel like you're trying to understand a concept and you are doubting yourself and that you're just not able to see it. But that's not the case. I can tell that Spirit is stressing the fact that up until now you were not meant to see what was going on. Partly because the mismatch was a way to help you grow. It was like the carrot that was dangling in front of your nose and you were chasing it. It was basically leverage. And I know this sounds hard and cruel, but there is this very uncomfortable truth, and people don't like to hear that and they don't like to see that. That real growth usually comes from pain. And I can tell that the collective this message is for, you have taken on a pretty huge purpose, a huge endeavor. Your soul has taken on a lot. And you could say, like, the bigger the cause or the goal that your soul has set for itself, the harder it is to get there. And even if it's maybe very uncomfortable for the human for a certain amount of time, it is actually the fastest way to get there. You have been put in circumstances that are highly uncomfortable and that are a mismatch for your soul, how you operate, who you are. And this has been chosen by design. And I know this is, for many people, this is a hard pill to swallow. But I think, I feel like the people, the collective who this message is meant for, you understand this concept. If you feel triggered or offended or, you get like all kinds of emotions around this concept and me saying this, I can tell you right away that this is not your message yet. Maybe later. Maybe if you at some point feel like you understand it and you don't have a strong emotional reaction to it anymore, you can come back and maybe it resonates then. But I can tell that Spirit is very distinct about who this message is for. And like I said, if you don't feel like you can go with this idea, then this is not your message. All right, the battle upstream continues. It's really, I keep repeating myself, but this energy is no joke. It's really not easy to work through this. All right. So you have been put into circumstances that feel like a mismatch for your soul. And they are. They are. But like I said, they created the perfect amount of friction that your soul needed to up level, to go to the next level. And while this was necessary for a while you were in a certain phase of your growth, it is time now for you to break free. And this is a continuation of the messages I've been bringing forth over the last few days. There was a lot around the necessity to break free from certain systems, from families, societies, belief systems, whatever. And that now the time has come where this energy of friction has basically run its course. You've learned your lessons, you integrated the lessons, and now there is this one last, I don't want to call it a test because I don't like the term for reasons. Let's maybe call it a task. It's like the last quest that you have to master before you get to the next level. And let me tell you, your soul has been working on this for ages, lifetimes. And the reason why you feel this mismatch so intensely is because there is a certain phenomenon going on inside yourself, something that you're not able to see and that you have to resolve in order to get to the next level. So this brings me back to what I said earlier about that you know that this universal law of as within, so without, and that the outer world is basically a reflection of your inner world, but that you are unable to see and to understand why your outer world seems to be actually pretty much the opposite of what is going on inside of you. And like I said before, this is not your fault that you are unable to see what's going on, or that you are too stupid or faulty in any way. Like I said, this is by design. You were not meant to see it because you needed to stay into this uncomfortable situation in order to grow. But now you have arrived at the point in your journey where you have integrated all the lessons that you could possibly learn from this situation. And it is time to move on. It is time to get to the next level. So what is your final quest? And it has to do with this understanding of what is going on with this mismatch, from why is the outer world not matching my inner world. And the way Spirit presented me this whole thing is they called it's an inner split. This basically means that we are not able to see the whole picture, but we are only seeing like one side of a coin. And we are living in a polarized universe. The reality we are living in is dualistic. And while our spiritual journey on earth is a journey of overcoming this dualistic mindset and to come back to oneness, it is still the factual reality that we are dealing with in this world, in this 3D life. And we are meant to do that. So when we understand and accept that everything in this universe is one, which means that my inside world and my outside world are one as well, we truly understand this concept, this law of mirroring, because we do understand that the outside world is a reflection of our inner world, and that they are opposing forces that form a whole. And while this is true, my guides are saying sometimes it's confusing because, like in your case, this, like, the outside world is not matching your inner world. So you're like, what kind of mirror is that? My mirror is broken. And my guides are saying that the mirror doesn't always work like this simple tool that is mirroring back to you what you think you should see, but that you should consider it more as a magical mirror that has the ability to mirror back to you what you cannot see. And this is where the true power lies. Because you understand, when you integrate this knowledge, that the outside world is showing you what's inside of yourself, but you're unable to see. And this is, like I said before, it's a hard pill to swallow. And there are not many people who put in the work and are willing to put aside their ego and look into this magical mirror and take on full responsibility for what they see. And now my guides are saying that in this case, you could also use a different name for the phenomenon that is happening, and not calling it the law of mirroring, but also calling it the law of balance. And that everything in this universe is striving for balance. So when you have these opposing forces and you have integrated them and balanced them inside of yourself, it will show up like that in the outside world. If it doesn't, if there is this mismatch from the inner and the outer world, the magical mirror is showing you that there is an imbalance inside of yourself. And now this is where the juicy stuff is coming to light. And I know that this has been quite a build-up, but I feel like it's necessary for the concept I'm going to talk about next. Not because the concept in and of itself is groundbreaking or hard to understand, but because of the gravity the concept holds in your particular case. So I like to work with archetypes. For me, it's just an easy way to translate energy. Archetypes, the way I work with them is they are an expression of energy. They are different flavors of energy. And it makes it easier and more accessible to work with energy, especially when it's, like in this case, an energy that's hard to grasp or is hidden and not easy to see. So this concept of duality is also a core part of archetypal work, because we know that archetypes, they have a healthy light side and a so-called shadow side. which is often referred as an unhealthy expression of an archetype. And while there are archetypes where we can easily see those light and shadow sides of the archetype, there are other archetypes where it's harder to see for us. And the reason for that is how I understand it, and I've been spending a great deal of contemplating on this topic, that certain cultural developments had the effect on archetypes that they didn't necessarily hold the duality inside of themselves, but that they were split into two parts. And this is a very typical phenomenon in the Christian belief. When you, for example, take the ancient gods and goddesses, they were not perfect. When you look at the Greek pantheon, for example, those archetypes, and gods and goddesses are basically archetypes. They are an expression of a certain flavor of energy. They were not perfect at all. They were very, very faulty. And they had this expression of a light and a shadow side ingrained in them. And they were very, very present in their myths as well. I'm not saying that there are not other examples of this kind of split I'm talking about in ancient myths and gods, goddesses. There are examples, I know. But I would argue that this internal split in light and shadow, in good and bad, found its strongest expression in the Christian belief. And there are many examples I could go into, but I feel like we are covering a lot of ground here today, so I don't want to complicate the whole message even further. It's already pretty complex. So let's get back to you and the inner split that is happening inside of you. And we can, or you can, use archetypes to find out what this particular split is showing you. And I'm going to use a very specific example here. And I want to stress that I've been picking up on this particular energy, this particular archetype in this collective over the last 1 or 2 weeks. But that this is by no means the only split and the only archetypal energies that can be showing up inside of yourself. And maybe you do not resonate with what I'm going to talk about, but you can find your own archetypes inside of yourself that are active and where you cannot see the shadow aspect of a certain archetype that's active inside of yourself. And we will see. Maybe it comes up in future readings, or you're just basically asked to do the detective work yourself. So the energy I've been picking up on is the energy of self-sacrifice, and which is mirrored or embodied by the archetype of the martyr. And the martyr is a certain type of victimhood, and it is deeply, deeply, deeply ingrained in the history of Christianity. You could even argue that it's part of the foundational belief that the Christian worldview and internal belief system is made of. It starts with Christ, the ultimate sacrifice that Christ did for humanity. And it continues with the persecution of early Christian believers and all the stories of martyrdom that are told in the Bible and that shape the Christian narrative from the very beginning. I mean, this is where Christianity parted ways with Judaism. The fact that they believe in Christ and that Christ brought the ultimate sacrifice in order to save humanity. And this idea about self-sacrifice is not new. It's nothing that the Christians invented. It's a very common theme in the Old Testament, and one of the most prominent and central stories is the one of the binding of Isaac, where Abraham was asked to bring the ultimate sacrifice for God and to prove his faith by sacrificing his own son, his only son, that he was waiting for so long. And he already had given so many sacrifices before he and his wife Sarah were able to receive a son. And then God came in and basically asked him to sacrifice this one thing that he had desired the most in his life. And this is a story which is widely discussed in theological terms, in academics, but also with believers and people who follow the Jewish or Christian faith. And this is one of the stories that people have like a really hard time to wrap their mind around. And this is for a reason. There's a reason why people are having such a hard time to come to terms with this story. And there's this seemingly very, very cruel thing happening, that God is asking this ultimate sacrifice from Abraham. And by showing God that he is willing to follow him blindly, and he is about to sacrifice his son, Isaac, this blind trust and faith and following through, or willingness to follow through, ultimately saves him. And I mean, if you don't know the story, just go and read it. But I do believe that most people know the story. So God interferes and he sends down an angel, I think, that prevents this ultimate sacrifice. And instead, Abraham sacrifices a goat, which is a significantly smaller sacrifice that he has to give. But it's still a sacrifice, but it's so much smaller. But he was only able to achieve what he wanted to achieve, which was a certain bond with God. But he was only able to achieve that by being willing to sacrifice what was the most important thing for him. And then in the end, he didn't have to sacrifice it. And yeah, like I said, this is a very hard story to wrap your mind around and to to come to terms with. And at the heart, there is this question of what kind of God is that actually wants me to sacrifice everything only to show him that I blindly trust and follow him and obey him. So the downloads I received about that over the last few days was that this idea and belief that we need to self-sacrifice in order to serve something higher and to find meaning in existence, that we as a collective are asked to heal out of that. And that it is possible to serve something bigger than us without the total self-sacrifice. And yes, there is the need to sacrifice something in order to gain something else. But there is a need for a balance. And the higher the goal, the bigger the sacrifice is. And this brings us back to this concept we talked about earlier, or this phenomenon that is your soul put yourself in circumstances, probably from the beginning of your existence here in this lifetime on Earth, that basically made you suffer a great deal. And you, like I said, you gained all the knowledge, all the lessons that you could from that experience. And you already made a huge sacrifice. But what my guides are saying right now is that there is no need to unnecessarily prolong the sacrifice. Like Abraham, who learned a lesson from this whole shenanigan with almost sacrificing his son. He learned a lesson, and it was a tough lesson to learn, and you can argue if it was the right way to go or if this is a good way to teach lessons. It seems kind of questionable, but well, the Old Testament God, he has sometimes interesting ways of parenting, you could say. Anyways, you learned your lessons, and there's no need to stay in this lesson any longer. And like Abraham, who was given a choice, he was given the choice of, well, you don't have to sacrifice your son, the sacrifice of the goat, which is still a sacrifice because this was an asset back in those days. But yeah, it was a significantly smaller sacrifice than his own son. And Abraham wanted a partnership with God, so the sacrifice had to be huge. So he thought. But the actual sacrifice was not his son. It was the sacrifice of his ego. It was the willingness to trust and sacrifice the one thing that was closest to his heart. And by simply doing that, by simply being willing to do that, that was the ultimate sacrifice. It wasn't about the physical sacrifice. It was about the sacrifice of his ego. So this belief about that we have to sacrifice something in order to gain something else, and the belief that we as humans are doomed to live with sacrifice and hardship, those roots are going so much deeper, and they're going back to the fall from grace, to Adam and Eve, basically. So you can see how deeply ingrained this whole self-sacrifice topic is in our, really in the belief system of our whole society, at least the Western society, or like all societies that have been in contact with Christian belief systems, and there are not many on this planet that haven't. So this idea about the eternal sin and the unworthiness of humankind is at the core of not just Christianity, but basically all the monotheistic world religions that go back to the Old Testament and this core belief about the eternal sin. Okay, this message is, again, it's getting so long. This is a real deep dive. I love it. And it shows me that the collective I'm connecting with, that you love it too. And that you're digging this stuff. And I'm so grateful for that. I just wanted to throw that in before I continue, because we're not done yet. Not done yet. I know this is getting so long again, but not quite there yet. So now that we do hopefully understand, where this whole concept of self-sacrifice comes from and how deeply rooted it is in our core belief system, the question is, where does the martyr show up in our own life? And a few words on like this concept of martyrdom. It basically means that you are willing to die, or at least sacrifice yourself in whichever way that means for you, but you're willing to sacrifice yourself for a higher purpose, something you deeply, deeply believe in. And that's the reason why you're willing to sacrifice yourself for that. And this sounds pretty noble, right? And in like when you look at Christian history, this really meant that Christians, they had to die because they were living by their truth. And they had to either deny their inner truth, which was to follow the teachings of Christ, or they had to die. But those early Christians, they did not just die because they believed that they deserved it, but they believed that they were doing it for a greater cause. And they believed, and this is also a very typical thing when it comes to martyrdom, they believed that when they sacrifice themselves, they will be rewarded in the end. Christians believe that they will be saved, and that when the judgment day comes, they will ascend to heaven. So there was basically a belief in, like I said, this greater cause, but also the salvation of my soul, my eternal soul. And you can translate this to modern days. Like, why do people self-sacrifice? Like, for example, let's say mothers. They're a perfect example for self-sacrifice. How much are they sacrificing for like a greater cause that they believe in, which is the upbringing of their children, the service to their family. But there's also the belief that I will be rewarded for this, basically with love. And this is what all people want. Everybody wants to be loved. And this is at the core of the so-called victim mentality, why people are staying in very unhealthy circumstances, for example, because they are hoping for love, that when they stay in a certain situation that is obviously toxic, for example, they believe that when they stay, that they will be rewarded with love in the end. So they're sacrificing themselves. They're sacrificing their inner truth. And this is basically operating out of a lack mindset. And people who operate out of this mindset, they usually attract people that only take, but don't give back. So the quote-unquote victim is giving, and the other party is taking, and the giver is doing that out of the belief that they have to, because otherwise they're not worthy of receiving love. So coming back to the martyrs, they are usually celebrated after they are gone. And the same thing with this victim dynamic. People who are giving. Let's get back to the example of our self-sacrificing mother. A mother who's always sacrificing herself for her family and her children, usually she's taken for granted. But the moment she is leaving, the whole system collapses. And then suddenly people realize what they had and what they gained from this self-sacrifice. So they're starting to maybe try to convince her to come back. And when you're operating out of this core belief of I have to give in order to gain love, and when you suddenly stop giving and the other party is realizing that they're missing something, and then they try to get the giver back, this is what the giver was hoping for. They are hoping that at some point they will be rewarded for all the energy they have been putting into a system or a person or whatever that's only taking from them. They are hoping that the other party will see one day what they have been sacrificing. And this is also the reason why people stay in those kind of situations, because they believe that if I only give enough, one day the other party will wake up and see what I've done for them, like all along. And this makes them stay and continuously sacrifice themselves. And I mean, there is this mechanism around delayed reward systems, and sometimes this is necessary. This is a very useful tool that we as humans can use for ourselves when we want to achieve something, like, for example, like when we are working out, when we are working towards goals, or also when we are having children, because you put in a lot before you get something back. But you can operate out of abundance, which is a form of empowerment and serves you in a way that you are able to gain healthy achievements. But this is operating out of a belief in worthiness. When you're operating out of abundance, you believe that you're worthy of achieving this. But you can also operate out of a lack, and you believe in your unworthiness. Hence, you have to prove yourself worthy. And this is when you start to self-sacrifice. Because somebody who's operating out of abundance and a sense of worthiness will not sacrifice themselves for the outcome of their effort. They will be able to achieve what they want without self-sacrifice. All right, I really hope this all makes sense, because I feel like this is, I don't know if I'm making it more complicated than it has to be, but well, let's get back to the idea about the duality and the archetypes. So we talked about the archetype of the martyr, and we tend to celebrate martyrs, but like I said, usually after they are gone. So this is like the ultimate delayed gratification, and one that doesn't serve you at all because you're not there to receive it. basically. And when we look at the martyr, we see this completely, especially how they are celebrated in the Christian church. They are those perfect, holy, light beings that are being sacrificed and persecuted and killed, usually, by a perpetrator. And so you could say when there is a martyr, there's always a villain. And this villain can be a person, a system, or circumstances. And now we are getting to the point where you hopefully will be able to see what is going on, because this martyr-villain dynamic can play out externally, but like we stated earlier, is a direct reflection of your internal world. And this is the tough part. This is the tough part to see. The question is, where are you holding those beliefs about you have to sacrifice yourself? And where are you playing the martyr? Actually, my guides, I wrote this down. They stated it with, is the victim playing the martyr? Meaning that the victim is usually a victim of circumstances, right? But there comes a time when the victim can heal out of the victim state and become self-empowered and understand that they can be the creator of their own reality, and they can, at least to a certain degree, I mean, obviously I'm not talking about circumstances where people are really in danger of their life. I'm speaking about day-to-day circumstances where you stay in the toxic relationship, or you stay in the obviously toxic family system, circle of friends, whatever, like where we have the freedom to leave. But we think we cannot leave for whatever reasons. And those reasons seem to be very, like, they are not obvious. They're also not obvious to you. And that is because the reason is your internal sense of unworthiness, because you believe that inside of you there is a villain. And this is what you cannot see. The villain is what you are not able to see. And this is the reason why you stay in the circumstances you are in, and you cannot supposedly not leave, because you believe that there is this evil part inside of yourself, this villain. And this villain is living in your subconsciousness. It is the part that you cannot see. And I'm not saying that this is true. I'm not saying that there really is an evil part inside of yourself. In fact, I would even go this far and say I'm pretty sure that this is not true. But it doesn't matter. Because you are the creator of your reality. You are the one who believes that there is a villain inside of yourself. And that's the reason why you are not worthy of leaving the circumstances that you are in. And this again brings us back to the core belief in societies that have been shaped by Judeo-Christian beliefs, that we as humans are internally faulty by design, that we carry inside of ourselves. We carry this eternal sin, and we can only be released from this eternal sin by the sacrifice Christ made, and this will not be before the ultimate judgment day. But all of this only can exist in a worldview that sees the world in terms of good and bad, and that you are someone who is being judged by an external force, aka God. And I want to throw in, I know this is getting so long, but I trust that everything that's coming through, it serves a purpose. And like I said, I feel like the people this is meant for, you have the capacity to dive deep, and you want to go deep. So I'm bringing in another archetype that showed up in this whole downloading channeling process that I had. It was the goddess Ma'at, the Egyptian goddess Ma'at, who was believed to weigh the heart of people who had died, and she was weighing their hearts against a feather, and only when their heart was lighter as a feather, they could pass through into paradise. So Ma'at showed up in my meditation, and she was telling me that this is actually an inside measure and not something externally that is defining the weight of your heart. The question is, do you believe you are worthy to pass, or do you believe you still have to prove your worth by sacrificing yourself, for that matter, in this case? And we are used to look outside of ourselves for a judge, but there is no external God, and there is actually also no Ma'at or any other judging power outside of you. Like I said, Ma'at is an archetype, and archetypes are basically the expression of certain energies, and all those archetypes are existing inside of yourself. So you are your own Ma'at. This is nobody outside of yourself. Like, there's no God outside of yourself, and there is no Ma'at out of yourself who is judging whether or not you are worthy enough to pass. You are the judge. So, do you believe you are worthy? And if so, why do you feel the need to sacrifice yourself? Because there are certain thoughts present, and I can tell that still kind of hold you almost hostage. And this is the martyr inside of yourself who believes that they have to stay. They have to stay in this situation, and that they have to sacrifice themselves for a greater cause. And the reason why you believe that is because there is, like I said, a villain present inside of yourself, or some part of yourself that is perceived as the villain, that is judged as being a villain. And most possibly it is judged by external forces, external belief systems that you haven't checked since the moment the villain had to retrieve into the darkness. Because this so-called villain inside of yourself, it's basically a part of you that had to retrieve into the darkness, into the subconscious, because it was judged as bad or even evil by external standards, it is time that you see for yourself. You have to find the quote-unquote villain, and you have to find out who that really is, and if you really have to keep punishing yourself for having this part inside of you. And I do hope that you are able to, instead, you're able to make peace with this part and see it for what it is, for what it truly is, not by some external standards that were put on you and put on this part of yourself. But you can see for what it truly is, and you can integrate it and become whole in the process again. And you already see where this is going. The moment you become whole in yourself, by accepting yourself with everything there is, the outside doesn't have to mirror back what you are unable to see in yourself. And there's one last thing I want to touch on before I close out this incredibly long reading slash teaching. It's kind of a hybrid here. It turned into a teaching session, really. So, yeah, what I want to touch on is that you are feeling or you are seeing a greater cause. And that is a beautiful thing. And nobody's asking that you sacrifice that, that you abandon this calling that you might feel. The only thing is that Spirit is asking you to first free yourself from the lack core belief that is at the root of this whole dynamic that you are experiencing. They are asking you to step out of it. And the moment you step out of it and you integrated those, like all of those parts, and you come into true inner abundance and this inner balance, that's the moment when you can take a step back and look at all the cards on the table, and then you can decide whether you want to come back and fight for whatever the belief is that you have you want to fight for. It's interesting that I'm saying like that there's something you want to fight for, and I feel like this is part of why it's so hard for you to go, because there's something you believe in and you want to fight for. But like I said, before you can fight for the cause you believe in and you can access all the resources you have inside of yourself, you first have to heal out of this lack mentality, this victim martyr mentality, before you can make a decision on how you want to fight for the cause you believe in. And I can tell that there is a huge collective of guides present here. This is so important. There is like this whole armada of guides that are weighing in here and helping me through this message. And they are saying you would be surprised, you will be surprised how limited your ability to see the whole picture is right now. And when you step out of it, and you allow yourself to be free, and you allow yourself to go after what brings joy, really, you will discover that you can still fight for whatever you believe in and whatever you believe is worth fighting for. And you can do this in an even more impactful way than you ever could have if you stayed. And what they're also emphasizing is that unlike our ancestors, unlike all the people who came before us and who were living in circumstances where they really had to sacrifice a great deal in order to live their truth. Sometimes they even had to pay with their lives. And we are lucky enough to live in times, as imperfect they might seem. And we know that there are many, many challenges to the life, the modern life. As imperfect and faulty this may be, we are having one great advantage to all the people that came before us. We are finally free to speak our truth and to live the life that we want to live. At least, and this is not true for everybody on this planet, but the collective I'm speaking here to, you have a choice. And this guide collective is asking you to own your freedom, to take on the responsibility for this freedom of choice. And this may seem counterintuitive, but this actually means to accept the fact that you are worthy, that you don't have to suffer anymore, and that you are allowed to live a joyful life. You don't have to be the martyr anymore. And let me end on one remark. While researching about martyrs and like all the background I've been giving you here, I came across a person who is considered to be a martyr of the Protestant church here in Germany. I'm German. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and he was part of the resistance against the Nazi regime. And I can tell you, as somebody with German roots and somebody who grew up in this country and with all the history that comes with the German heritage, this idea about the freedom of choice, the freedom of being able to speak my truth, what I believe in, and what it means for a whole society to not be free to speak about that, and to like being persecuted for not only who you are in certain cases, like the whole Shoah, the whole Holocaust, where people were persecuted simply for what their roots are, but also persecution of people who did not agree with those kind of injustices and deeply, deeply distorted and cruel beliefs. And yeah, people who stood up for what they believed in. And there were many, many people who paid with their lives for that. And as somebody who was born and raised in this country, and I grew up with this history and with, we are educated about this topic in a very broad sense. The Nazi regime makes up a great part of the history lessons in school. And it plays a big role in our public life and the political stage, and yeah, in general, our whole self-understanding as a nation, and it plays a huge part. So I was born and raised with the understanding of the great value of being free to speak my mind, to have my own opinions. And we are, at a very, very young age, all of us has been confronted with the question, what would I have done? And I don't think that this is a question that is easily answered, or if it's like, if we can be able to answer it at all before we are actually in those kind of scenarios. And you can probably tell by my voice that I'm getting emotional. But with all this knowledge and this heritage that I have as a German, I also believe in this great gift of freedom that the last 100 years of human history have given us, at least some parts in this world. And if we count ourselves lucky enough to be part of one of those societies where it's still possible to speak our truth and to be who we are, I think it is our duty to accept this gift. We have to accept the responsibility of the freedom of choice. For our ancestors who were not able to do that, and for all the people in this world who are still not able to do it, who still don't have the freedom that we have. So this got more intense than I thought it would. The whole reading, the length, the intensity, the deep dive, the emotions at the end here. I'm literally shaking. So, yeah, I need to collect myself and bring this to an end. If you stayed until here, I know, I can tell that you are sincerely interested in resolving this issue. You are willing to dive deep. You are willing to get to the root of things, to understand what's really at the heart of a matter. And I thank you so much for this. And yeah, I wish you all the best for the search for whatever this quote unquote villain part of yours is. And I want you to know that you're not alone in this. I've gone through it. And know that there are many others out there who are going through it with you right now, too. So thank you again. And I wish you the best of luck with all of this. And hopefully maybe see you in the next video. Bye.